What's up guys, welcome to the channel. This is PolyRender. I've had a lot of requests lately to add some narration onto my videos. I didn't have a mic for the longest time, but I finally got around to getting one. So hopefully going forward, a lot of the videos should have some narration. I know it's helpful to follow along and see the steps, so let me know in the comments if this is something you want to see more of, and let's just dive into it. So this is part 2 to the service station, and here I'm just loading in my FBX from Maya. I'm setting the output size to 4K, and I'm clicking use low poly mesh as high poly mesh. This was just being used as renders, not being used in the game, so I didn't have any low or high poly meshes to work with. And go to the bottom right and click bake selected textures. Substance will bake your texture maps for you, and then you're ready to texture. So most of the time when I create these models, I don't really know what color they're going to be or exactly how they're going to look in the end, and I wing it along the way. That's part of the fun with texturing. So I usually start with a smart material as the base. It's a really good way of starting. You can delete things out or just kind of getting a good foundation, and then you can build off of that. So here I'm starting with steel painted scrap dirty. I really like the wear and tear it started with. It looked pretty good just off the start, so I just kind of go in and tweak some of those settings to give it a desired look that I'm looking for. So what I did here was just right click the steel paint, set it to a black mask. On the left side there's a polygon fill option. Then you have different ways to fill in that texture to your black mask. So you can either set it to a certain object, to a certain UV, to a certain face. You really have full control of how you want to apply that material. So in this case I'm setting it to mesh fill, and I'll just click on the mesh that I want to assign the material to. So here I'm just going through, tweaking some of the scratches and the grunge, removing some of the wear, and trying to find a color that I'm happy with. I couldn't settle on a color, I kept switching it around, but finally decided to go on this red orangish kind of shade. But once again, you can spend just hours tweaking colors alone, so you gotta know when to just go with something. Now I'm adding in some steel ruined. Once again, just messing around with the levels, bringing them down a little bit. A lot of these materials are pretty cool, so wanted to give it that old kind of abandoned but still functional kind of look. So once again, I do it to almost every material I work with in Substance, but just right click the material, set it to a black mask, and then you can apply that texture to whichever objects you want. And here I'm just applying a few more of the metal materials that I need for the gas pump, and going through and tweaking a few of the settings. And continuing on, silver armor, which is one of my favorite materials. It's another smart material. Just choosing, want to have a different shade, different types of metals, so it doesn't look too consistent. Once again, adding a black mask, adding a rubber dry to the hose. I was getting that weird black on the material, but it actually wasn't showing up in the render, so I just decided to leave it. And just tweaking settings, using those, adjusting the dirt levels and the grunge amounts, trying to get that wear where the handle would be. It would be more worn out where the grip is compared to the bottom, so just messing around with stuff. It's hard to always know when to quit when you're doing these. You can just keep tweaking settings for hours. It's one of the fun things about Substance Painter. I love the texturing process, probably my favorite part of the whole process of creating these models, but it's always difficult to know when to quit. So here, just going through, trying to decide what I want the handle to be. Like I said earlier, just trying to have different types of materials. If it's too consistent, it looks too fake. All the metals in real life aren't always the same, especially on worn out objects. They all look They all have different wear from weather and people touching them and moving them over time. It just wears itself out. Here I'm working on that front logo, old school kind of logo. Just trying to find a metal that's not too worn out. Now I originally had my pumps on 2 different texture maps. I was going to do one as yellow and have it diesel, but I just thought that having consistent red just looked better. I don't know, it was almost easier. I didn't have a lot of time. I do these models on the weekends, so I try to do it through one sitting, and I didn't, it was just a quicker route for me. It was a long day. Adding more wear and tear. This texture is pretty cool. A lot of that grunge. Don't want it too worn out because it's, like I said, I still want it looking functional, not like it's completely abandoned. Drove down Route 66 once and it was super cool. All the abandoned little towns and vehicles and stuff along the way. You want to stop and explore everywhere. I remember it was super cool. So I was definitely trying to get those vibes. So yeah, going through, I'm copying over my textures from the other pump. Like I said, I was going to do this one different. That's why I originally had them on different maps. But in this case, I just wanted to keep them the same. And another reason as well is when I'm adding all that wear and tear, they are going to be different because they're on different maps. Whereas if I just copied them and they were sitting on the exact same place on the UV map, then the wear and tear and the sand would be identical on each, and that wouldn't be as realistic because you wouldn't have the same dirt splashes and the scratches on the exact same spots on both of each pumps. So it actually worked out in the end, and that, later on in the video I actually go through and adjust that and just have a little more. I remember I made the left one I think a little less worn out. I think that's what I'm starting to do here. And even if you look right now at the bottom right corner where those vents are, you can see that the dirt is the exact same on both of them, and that's something I changed later on, just to add a little more realism into the models. Yeah, just trying to find those materials. Something that's super helpful and what you should do is labeling your materials. I always go through and have to click them to see which it is because I'm just lazy and I don't assign names to them. When you have a bunch of different steels, you start getting confused which steel is assigned to which object. So definitely recommend doing that. Don't be lazy like me. And here I'm just wrapping up the last few of the textures I need to swap over from the first pump to the second pump. Pretty happy with how it was looking, so I wanted to move on to start doing some of the labels, start doing some of the lettering. So now I'm looking through the alphas, going through the text that they have. You're very limited with what text they have, and I was actually trying to find one, and I always try to make it work, but very tough when there's only so many options, so a lot of the times just go into Photoshop, make your own alpha, bring it in, and you can really choose any font you want, and that's exactly what I did here. The power of Photoshop. And now I'm just picking a shade of red that I'd like. So something I could have done afterwards was go through and added some nicks and some scratches on top of the lettering. Because it's so perfect and everything else on the pump is pretty scratched up and weathered, I should have scratched them up a bit as well to kind of match everything else, but that's the thing, there's always something else to do, so sometimes there's just not enough time. So now I'm going over and grabbing the color codes as well as the texture just so I can apply it to the other pump. Now applying the regular text, and now it's time to do the numbers. So same thing, I'm just looking for a font that I think fits the whole model. I'm starting with a glossy material as a base color, which gives me just a lot of control. I can go tweak the settings afterwards, but just like before, there was nothing that really fit what I was looking for. So I ended up just jumping into Photoshop. And as you can see here, I'm just trying a few things out, and then I just realized it's not the font that I want, so I ended up making all of these, just assigning them all to alphas to the current session. And then you can go through and just drag them onto your alpha and just paint them right onto the material. And like I mentioned before, because I just used that glossy blue basic material as a base, afterwards I can go in and change the color, the specularity, and the roughness and all the settings to get the desired look I'm looking for. And then here I'm just giving it a little off-white. Nothing's ever truly white or black in real life, so I'm just kind of giving it a little yellow tint because of the wear over the years. And now I just copied over the same materials from the other pump and just reapplying those alphas so I can reprint them onto the second pump. I could have gone through afterwards and scratched up some of these letters as well. Just add a little bit more of that realism. It's something I miss, I just didn't have enough time. Alright, so now just moving on to the numbers, I decided to go with one of the built-in alphas that Substance has. It turned out to be pretty good and it fit what I was looking for, so just decided to go along with that. So here I'm just offsetting all the numbers to kind of give it that illusion like they can roll and they rotate around. In reality, there's just no polys behind, but the power of 3D, you can fake it, so here I'm just kind of giving it that illusion. So yeah, I was pretty happy with how it's turning out so far. Now time to move on to the top. So we're doing the signs. I found these images on Google, just free images I found, Route 66, where I was trying to, in my head, where these pumps were living. So I just brought those into Photoshop, basically remove the background, and put them on. boom, you got some new signs on top, just like that. So here I'm just gonna add the white. The white was too clean, so giving it that wear like the inside I did earlier gives it it's a little marked up. I'll just copy that texture over to the other pump. So here, since I copied over, like I mentioned earlier, the marks are actually in the exact same spot as the other ones. So here I'm just rotating them around just so they're not lined up. Make it a little different. Now time to move on to the middle. So just copying the same red from the other one. And here I didn't want to actually make it as dirty, so I just copied the plastic glossiness from that texture. And assigning the same metals from the other objects, just clicking them, copying, switching over to the new texture, and pasting. So same process as before, just starting with a smart material, going through, tweaking some of the settings, turning off the things that I don't want, adjusting the colors and the roughness, and then assigning it to a black mask, and then assigning it to the mesh. And here's the same thing. I could have spent a little more time actually like working on the grunge on the metal, but it was a long day, so just kind of smart materials are pretty wicked as is, so I was taking advantage of those for sure. Now here, as you see, I was using that same wear and tear from the other objects, the other pumps, and then when I assigned it to that pole, I was getting a lot more wear than I wanted, so what I had to do was just basically unselect it from the pole so it was only on the top, and then I copied the same material, duplicated it, deleted the wear and tear out of that one, and assigned it to the pole, so the pole didn't have that metal scratch and the top part did. So here I'm just assigning some rubber dry to the hose and some bronze to the nozzle. I'm just removing some of that edge wear and changing the color a little bit to get exactly what I'm looking for. And then the classic right click black mask and assigning it to the object. And I keep zooming out and back in to get different perspectives. It's always good to move the camera around to see how the material looks, as well as changing the light. So if you hold shift and right click and drag, you can move the lighting around. It's always important to do that and see how the material looks, just have different perspectives. So here I noticed the pole was a little too clean, so I just kind of go through and tweak some of those settings to get something a little more worn out. Here I'm just trying to match the red color, and then I realized I could just eyedrop it on, which I end up doing. So now I'm just trying to copy the same fonts. I want it to be consistent so they look like they actually all belong to each other. Just adding that same white wear It's removing some of the black edging. It was just a little too much. So brought that back a bit. Now I'm going to go on and add the plastic and the numbers just like the other ones. Same process. Copy the exact same white. I just chopped it out. So here I realized that there actually isn't 3 digits. There's always an arrow on the front. So going through the different alphas to see which arrows there are, you could go into Photoshop just like before and make your own. Just to make this really quick, I just found something that was already in Substance. Now for the instructions, I actually found luckily I found a reference image that showed some of the instructions, so I just copied those. Whatever that said, I just wrote it in. Just found a font that was already in Substance to make my life a little easier. So here I'm just copying it off of Google. Google is your best friend. Always remember to work with a little bit of reference. I always gather a couple images on my other monitor just beside me as I'm working. And here, same thing, just assigning plastic colors so then I can tweak the settings afterwards to whichever I like. So I'm just going to make it black text. Now same thing for the front air. I didn't find a font in Substance that I liked. Everything it just wasn't matching, so I went into Photoshop, found a font that I liked, exported it as an alpha, dragged it in, just like the other ones, assigned it to the current session. And apply. And boom, the pump is done. Just like that. Don't forget to save the project. I've had way too many projects crash or power go out and you lose all your work. So don't forget to save. Now we're done the concrete. I found this material on Substance Source on their website. There's tons of free materials, especially if you're signed up and you have an account. You can just they have a lot. So I found this concrete ahead of time. I remember it was already in my project. I don't think it comes with Substance, I'm not sure. So here, just assigning the concrete to the object, tweaking the scale so I can have those dots very small and just apply the different concrete to the other ones, changing the color so it's not too gray, and adjusting the roughness. It's the same process over and over again with different materials. Just kind of finding something that I like. And then whenever I'm happy with the color, I do the same thing, right click, black mask, assign it to the object. Now here I'm just adding, same thing, a plastic. It doesn't matter, because you can tweak the settings afterwards, so I just tend to use the plastics glossier matte for just to start with as a base material. And then I go through and adjust the roughness, just adding some wear. Nothing's ever that clean, especially by some gas pumps. So here I'm adding a little specular material looking like something maybe leaked out at one point, or some gas that was leaking that dripped. So just going through I'm using a dirt brush. If you look at what brush I'm using, I'm just kind of going nuts, spreading it all over. Don't be afraid to go crazy and then bring it back, and I always end up doing that. So I'll just do more than I'm actually want at the beginning. So just giving it a little definition on the cracks, darkening the edges, and then I'll go through and put the eraser on and even take some back afterwards. I do that a lot of the times. And forgot a material on the air pump, so just assigning some concrete to the bottom. Once again, using a smart material as a base for those bolts. And boom. Cool, so concrete I'm pretty stoked with. Now just adding some rubber to the tires. Using the rubber dry, they actually have a material that's called rubber tire, but it was too shiny and the rubber dry just looked more worn out, so I went with that one. So here I found a tire image online. I just brought that in. I wanted to get that side text on the side of the tire. So what I do here to actually project that material on is on the left side you'll see a button that's just called projection, and if you click that and then I drag my material onto my base material, I can actually just paint on exactly what's there onto my UV map behind. So here I'm just lining up that texture, that tire image with my UV, and I'm just painting it right on. Now I'm just afterwards go through and erase all the white edges. I'm just doing this really roughly. I know the tire's not too much in the image, so it's not too important. Plus it's worn out, so I don't have to be too picky. Now what I could have done that I didn't do here was adding, I should have added, there's a height map already assigned, so I could have actually risen that up a tiny bit to give it a little bit of bump, a little bit of height on the lettering, but that's just a little tiny thing I could have done. I don't even know if it would have been too noticeable, but looking back now, that's definitely something that I missed. And you got some tires. So now I just jump into the render. Sometimes I just pop between both just to see how it looks. Sometimes things look a little off when you're actually in the renderer, so it's nice to quickly jump in to see how it looks. Now I look too clean, so just throwing in a little bit of dirt. Like I said, go crazy, then grab the eraser and bring it back. I can just make it a little more glossy, just so it looks like there's something on there. So same thing, just gonna paint that on, go to eraser, and bring some back. And rust, that rust barrel. Rust is always fun to play with. So with the barrel in the back, just adding a rust material to it. I want it to look pretty worn out, like that's been sitting there for years and no one's touched it kind of thing, so just cover it with rust. So I'm trying different rust materials here to see what I like. This guy looked pretty nice, so just making a little dark, tweak the colors until you're happy with something. And then the last thing, what we have left is grass and the sign. So here, just assigning a grass material, pretty easy. I knew that I can make a really small UV map, it wasn't important, so just needed to be a little green. And here, just once again, starting with a smart material, going in, tweaking the settings, assigning a black mask, assigning to the object. I'm looking through the office to find some drip effects, just to look like it's rusty from the top. I was just messing around with different sizes. Don't be afraid to try things, to add a lot. Like I said earlier, just go nuts, and then you can always bring it back with the eraser. Here I'm just trying different alphas, trying some different things out. And there's some happy mistakes, like that right there, just added it, oh that looks good. Just ended up keeping it, so don't be afraid to try new things, and just, you can always Control Z and remove it. So here I'm looking for a font, once again the built-in texts, and I wasn't happy with the spacing of these. And then rather than spacing it, I wasn't happy with it, so any of the spacings would be off. So I went to Photoshop, just spaced them myself, brought it in just like the other ones, and then you can change the color afterwards. Another thing I should have done was just scratch these letterings up. I didn't end up doing that, but that's a nice little touch up you could have done to make it a little more realistic, because on a sign that worn out, the lettering wouldn't be that crisp. But there's always something. Here, just adding a little more rust color. It was too dirty, not enough rust compared to the other objects in the scene, especially that barrel. So add a lot, go to eraser, bring a little bit back with the dirt brush. And again, I didn't title any of these, so I have to go through and click them all to find out what certain textures are which. So I definitely recommend, to save you time and not having to do this, just label your textures. Now for the ground, I noticed it was too gray and there wasn't like color in there, so I just wanted to add a couple more spots and give it just a little different shade. Make it a little white, like something was just staying there. I could have added other colors, which looking at it now, would have helped bring that realism, like maybe different, like something spilt there that wasn't just black. So here I'm just adding a little more wear. It was too clean, especially for some gas pumps. So I'm adding a little bit of rust. See, adding a little bit of color, a little bit of orange or a little yellow. And now opening up the render, take a look at it to see what it looks like. I realized for some reason it wasn't on the ground plane, so I just had to bring up the floor to match the bottom of the objects. here, so I almost forgot the text on the side, which I noticed when I was rendering. So here I'm just adding a quick text like the other times. Picking a font, looking for fonts. Unfortunately, I didn't find anything else happy with, so I brought in my own from Photoshop. So if you're ever using an alpha and for some reason when you click down it's spinning around, like I am right here, it's because there's jitter on it. So if you go through and just drag all of those sliders down to 0, and you should be good to go. And copying that same texture over to the other pump, and boom, texturing is done. It's now time to render. So I always knew I wanted to do a kind of a front angle as the main shot, so just changing the lighting to just go through the different options. I didn't want to bring it into Substance Stager, so just want to do some rendering right out of Substance. I love the lighting, and the presets that they have are pretty wicked. And it's always hard to choose what to do. I tend to always go with the soft one front or the one right beside it, the soft one front, 2 backs. Just the studio lightings look really good. I think I just ended up keeping it on panorama. It was just looked like it was outside. The studio lighting looked to, these pumps wouldn't be in the studio, they would be outside in some sunlight, so having that yellow tint from the sun and the reflections off making the metals look a little more specular, and you can see the dirt on the front. I ended up going with that. So, and that's a wrap. Thanks for sticking around if you have this far into the video. As much as I hate hearing my own voice, I hope the narration was helpful. I'm gonna try to do more in the future. It's tough. I do these on the weekends and I work all week, so depending on work, it's hard to find time to always do this. But now that I have a mic, I'm hoping to actually do this more frequently. So let me know in the comments what you thought of the video. Also, let me know if there's any models you'd like to see. I'm always struggling to choose what to model every week, so if there's anything that you'd like to see or any other things that you want to learn about, just let me know in the comments and I'd be more than happy to help out. Oh yeah, don't forget to like and subscribe, and I'll see you in the next video.